What's a little thing that someone did for you and probably forgot about it right away, but you remember it years later? When I was like 8 my mom worked as a cleaning lady for a family. The mom of that family took her kids to the movies and invited me to join them. We saw Toy Story. I felt so happy that I consciously tried to take a mental picture of that moment. It was like the second time I went to a cinema in my life. Way back in I think first grade, a couple of guys in my class started picking on me because my shoes weren't the cool ones. The popular guy stood up for me saying if they are comfortable for him, why does it matter? Something very small, but for some reason it still sticks out to me. I was an awkward teen and bullies loved to pick on me. One day, a guy was making fun of my shirt in front of the whole class. Those situations always made me die inside, but that day another guy spoke up and said, actually, I think it's a really cool shirt. That was over a decade ago, but I still remember the incident clear as day. One time I was in the summer school class and I became friends with two girls in the class. Once for a whole week they were purposefully ignoring me and I felt hurt. When I went to confront them, they surprised me with a poster board covered in magazine cutouts that spelled my name and had pictures of things I was interested in. Pictures of my characteristics and theirs too. They had been secretly working on it the whole time. Almost 20 years later I still have it somewhere. I was 7 years old and I was riding the bus with my mother. She was a horribly abusive mother and she was yelling and screaming at me about something I can no longer remember. The woman sitting across the bus from us was staring at my mom with her mouth open and look of shock in her eyes. That one tiny moment let me know that what was happening to me wasn't normal. It helped to start me down the path of understanding that my mother was the one with a problem, not me. That woman on the bus probably forgot about the whole thing by the time she went to bed that night, but that brief moment is still precious to me 44 years later. I was trying to quit drinking. I came home from work and my friend had gone and bought all kinds of non-alcoholic drinks, soda and a bunch of flavors of fizzy water and stuff, and left them for me so I would have other stuff to drink without having to navigate past the beer aisle at the grocery store. It was my sophomore year and we had 4 different math teachers that year, and then never the same sub twice after that. I had an F and I was freaking out because it's $75 to make up a credit. Anyways, a random math teacher in the same building starting doing our lessons but not actually teaching us. She noticed I was failing and did everything she could to help me, but we still didn't know if I would pass. She didn't do final grades. The last day of school she came and banged on the window of the class I was in and mouthed, "You passed," holding up my paper. It made me so happy she came to tell me. It was no big deal and she probably doesn't remember me at all, but I'll never forget it. She remembers. I asked my crush and co-worker if she wanted to go get dinner that night. I later overheard her reschedule her other plans to hang out with me. My college lab partner gave me a $100 right before Christmas break. We met up to go over labs and I told her I'd be late because I was donating plasma. When she gave it to me she said she was once in a place where she had to donate to get by. It was the nicest thing someone's done for me and I often find myself doing random acts of kindness because of it. I think she barely remembers me now, but I'll never forget her. I used to ride public transits to and from work every day. One day getting off the bus, a complete stranger hands me my wallet and says, "Freaking be careful," and walks away. Plot twist. He pickpocketed you to practice his skills but in returns his nabs to each person to teach situational awareness. As a teen, I didn't know how to read the bus schedule. I took the wrong bus and ended up in an unfamiliar neighborhood. I was super lost, overwhelmed, and trying not to panic. A tiny, elderly black lady in a giant hat saw me freaking out. She told me to take some deep breaths until I wasn't on the verge of tears, then taught me how to read the bus schedule. She told me which buses I needed to take to get back where I was going. I'm sure she didn't think anything about it, but I still appreciate what she did for me that day. Elderly black lady in a giant hat. Dude, you got helped by Gwinnett. I was in a youth shelter a few years back that would routinely open the door to check on their residents. In my childhood and teenage years, I had family members who would barge in to beat me in the middle of the night randomly and without reason. So, I had a tendency to bolt upright as soon as the air stirred from the door opening. It was a conditioning that was years in the making and had nothing to do with the shelter. Anyways, there was an employee who was known to be a real by the book kind of person. She followed the rules to the letter and rarely gave exceptions or special considerations. So many of the other residents disliked her. I always followed the rules and so we never really interacted much. It was my first week in the shelter and when she opened the door, I startled her with my reaction and we ended up staring at each other for a little bit. That's when she told me, in the kindest voice I'd ever heard coming from her, "It's okay, you know. No one here's gonna do anything to you. It's safe." I nodded because I didn't know how else to respond, but it did make me feel better. I had been living under fear for so long and she was the first person to ever tell me that I was safe in my entire life. Unfortunately, it didn't change any of my learned behaviors and I still never feel totally safe. Yet I still remember her saying that to me. I also had the sneaking suspicion that she didn't check up on me as much as the others after that and maybe told the other employees as well. I kinda just want to hug you really tight after reading that. I hope you find somewhere you can truly feel safe in. When I was in the hospital teetering on the edge of dying and brain damage, my friend Laura would just sit there holding my hand. It's amazing I remember that at all because I don't remember anything else. 30 years ago when I was 17, my friend and I went over to a classmate's house and saw her hug her dad. Up until that moment, I had no conscious knowledge that kids existed who loved their parents, or that parents could be loving to their children. That moment changed the way I saw the world and always stuck with me when I became a father. There weren't very many days when I was raising my own daughter that moment didn't come to mind. That classmate was universally loved and tragically died young from cancer, so I never got to tell her what she'd done for me. I did make it a point to hunt down her dad, tell him the story, and thank him. Without witnessing that, my entire adult life would have been dramatically different. That is a really nice story. Thanks so much for sharing it and peace to you and for all in your family. They are lucky. So I know it's considered bad etiquette to respond to your own question, but I just wanted to relate how this came to be asked. When I was a young man, I did really well in high school. All A's, teacher's pet, the whole shebang. After high school, with a lot of effort from me and my parents, I managed to get into a really good college. It was heck. While I was the smartest guy back in high school, doing well with no effort, here I felt like an idiot compared to 99% of people. Every day was depressing. I didn't understand anything, nothing was working out, and worst of all, I couldn't make any friends. I felt like nobody even knew who I was. Finally, I decided to drop out of school. I went to a couple more classes, and I was standing in line to talk to this one professor who I liked. I was planning on saying goodbye to him, and then the guy behind me straightened my collar, slapped me on the back, and said, "Come on, Alex, a genius like you can't walk around with a popped collar." I spun around, kinda scampered off, and hyperventilated a little bit. Then I got my freaking life in order, stayed in college, and eventually graduated and got a good job. And whenever I was feeling conflicted after that, I just thought of that guy, and my whole day brightened. I tried finding him later, with no success. That was a couple years ago. A couple days ago, I was walking in the street, when, holy crap, there's the guy. I run up to him and tell him how much I owe him, and how grateful I am. I'll never forget what he said. "Who are you?" So I told him the whole story, and we laughed and went our separate ways. It just got to me. He changed my whole life, and didn't even know who I was. Crazy. So I asked this question, and every single story here rings out to me, just so you know. My freshman year of college, I walked out of the library on day 4 and this girl just stops me and says, "Hey, I just wanted to tell you that you're really pretty. Have a nice day," and just walked away. I still smile about it years later. I was bullied throughout my childhood because of my red hair. But recently I was standing in front of a small venue and this one girl who's passing through just randomly told me that my hair color is awesome. I was in high school speech class. I've never been great at public speaking, supercharged social anxiety, so when we had to do a presentation, I was a nervous wreck. I chose tiger endangerment, and since we had to use props I made a pie chart. The class was less than impressed. One girl who didn't like me for some reason actually heckled me. This one guy who presented after I did gave a hilarious speech about how excited he was to go to college and pledge the frat that his older brother was in. The whole class was cracking up. When he was done, he walked past me to go back to his seat, and he leaned in and said, "I thought yours was better." A karma win in both directions. When I was in high school, our sports teams were pretty good. One basketball game we beat the visiting team pretty badly and their coaches made them run after. Those boys were so respectful. We were leaving around the same time and they held the doors for some of the team leaving and other home team visitors and cheerleaders. They didn't even look upset or like they were being forced to do it. That's the attitude you get when genuinely nice people play because of the love of the game. You make it fun, win or lose. A few years ago I had to go to Japan for work. I flew into Tokyo, then took trains down to the rural area where the site was. When I got off the last train, I couldn't find the bus stop to take me to the hotel. I walked up and down the street for 20 minutes with an enormous suitcase. I decided to ask an old woman out sweeping in her driveway. Of course, the only Japanese I knew was "thank you," and she did not know English. It took a few minutes of not communicating effectively, beyond the name of the hotel, which she definitely recognized, before she gestured one finger, like 1 minute, and disappears into her house. She pulls her car around the other side of the house and insists on driving me to the hotel 10 minutes across town. It was so overwhelmingly helpful and appreciated. I tried to give her the money for the bus but she wouldn't take any. I must have said thank you 100,000 times, but I don't think it was enough. I do think she got a kick out of pointing and laughing at how I was much too tall for her car and my head was grazing the ceiling, which is hilarious. I was in high school and there was some big test I needed to take for a class. My mom didn't like letting me miss school under any circumstances, including immediately after kidney surgery, so she made me go and take this test. I barely remember the test itself, but when I was done I just curled into a fetal position and shivered because I felt so cold. A guy who sat next to me got up and put his coat over me, didn't say a word, just gave me his coat and sat back down. I'm pretty sure his name was Frederick, but I don't know his last name and I don't think I knew it then. I have no idea where he is now, but I bet he grew up splendidly. Holy mother god. Tests can be rescheduled. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Schools definitely make special arrangements for extremely unusual circumstances. I hope you're in a better place, and that the kidney surgery helped make your life better. I was about 8 years old and in the French Alps on a skiing trip. My parents didn't want to get saddled with me and my sister, so put us in ski school. The class were skiing down a run when my ski got caught on something and fell down and got turned around. I couldn't get up off the floor without sliding backwards down the run, which ended in a sheer drop off the side of the mountain. Basically I was stuck and the ski school had continued down the mountain, not noticing they were a child down. I was stuck there for so long crying while everyone on the slope continued past me until one French snowboarder in his early 20s stopped to help me. I couldn't understand a word he said, but he picked me up off the floor, turned me round and helped me on my way. Guy probably forgot about it that night, but 20 or so years later and I can still remember clear as day. A few years ago my ex-wife and I had a tire blowout. We were stranded and didn't have any money. A stranger paid for a new tire just because they could. Today you, tomorrow me. I was in a bad mood for a whole week when my grandma passed. I stayed quiet in class, which was quite unusual for me. My classmate who always sits next to me in my morning classes gave me a chocolate bar at the end of the week. I was surprised and asked her why. She said it was just to make me feel a little bit better. I think about it still. I was a butthole teenager working at a movie theater. We hired this guy, let's call him Kevin, older guy in comparison to a lot of the people there. I was talking crap about this kid in the lobby for no particular reason and Kevin didn't say anything the whole time. I finally finished my bitter trash talk and Kevin said, "Do you feel better now?" Whoa. When I was under 10 I was obsessed with the video games that lined one of the local pizza places where I grew up. I'd bum as much change as I could from my parents while we were waiting for our food and plunk it down for whatever fighting game was in the rotation or the Addams Family pinball game they always had in the corner. One time when I was about 8 or so, I saw a much older guy, probably early 20s, plugging quarters into Mortal Kombat 2. I watched him play for a while, maybe longer than he was comfortable with to be fair, and took more than a little notice of the tobacco he was chewing. At some point he took the can out of his pocket with a pack of cigarettes and said, "Kid, whatever you do, don't start this crap." I can't say it's why I don't smoke, but it is one of my strongest associations with tobacco and something I always think about when the subject comes up. Okay, this story is awesome in its own right, but can I just say the Addams Family pinball game is the crap. I was homeless a couple years ago. While eating lunch outside of a library during winter, I held the door open for an older woman. She asked my name and told all of the library workers how nice of a person I was to help her. I hope she's doing okay. I stopped talking with my best friend for almost a year because job and family issues kinda separated us both, and he randomly wrote me after months of no contact, "What are you doing? How are you feeling? We should meet sometime." Not really that strange, but I was really contemplating about ending my life at that time. I was taking a bath thinking that I might not be alive next month when my phone suddenly vibrated next to the tub. I haven't told him, but I cried a lot that day and thought about my life. I'm not in a better spot, but I feel much better mentally. Don't think he knew what was up because I'm an introvert and loner, and my friends are used to not being able to reach me sometimes. It's the small things that can change something big. From someone who just had major problems with suicidal thoughts just a few days ago, tell your friend that he saved your life. It will help both you and your friend understand that you are cared for, and if you ever need somewhere to rant, PM me. I might not respond immediately, but I'll get it eventually. I took a new bus route for the first time when I was 19. I sat down in what I thought was a perfectly fine seat, not too close to anyone else on the bus, but the guy 2 seats down thought it was an invitation for him to slide over and make weird conversation with me. Started off complimenting me, then switching to complimenting my phone, which I was furiously engaged in. The woman across from me had sympathy in her eyes and pulled her bag in a little closer. Suddenly the bus lurched to a stop. The driver walked over to the guy and said, "Are you bothering this young lady?" The guy sputtered out a response and the driver said, "You can either stop this behavior or I can throw you out right here. Your choice." The guy continued protesting but ended up walking off the bus under his own power. When I got off at my stop later, the driver asked if what he did was okay. I made it very clear, I hope, that he was amazing, and I was very happy for what he did. My hero then ended up covering my fare. Not all heroes wear capes. I had a miscarriage and was devastated. It was after I had already been showing in my pregnancy, so everyone knew. I was at my parents' house and they had some guests over. When I came out of my room, all the guests got really quiet and didn't know what to say, so they all looked away and no one said anything, except one guy, a family friend, who came right up to me and said, "I'm sorry for your loss." He probably doesn't remember it, but I knew it took courage for him to do that, and it meant so much to me to have someone acknowledge my loss. Even though this was more than 10 years ago, I'm choking up as I write it. I thankfully have my beautiful children now, but I think about my miscarriages from time to time and still get emotional. It also taught me that you don't need to say anything special. Just acknowledging what someone is going through makes a huge impact. Before, I would have been like the others and not said anything because that's so much easier, and also because you won't say the wrong thing. But since then I will always reach out, even if it's awkward or uncomfortable. When I went back to work last year after my second miscarriage, a co-worker who really didn't like me came over and hugged me. She held me so tight. It meant so much to me because no one wanted to acknowledge my pain. I am now 22 weeks pregnant with my rainbow baby. Some guy in Belgium once stopped me in the street and told me I was beautiful. He then asked if I was gay and said it was a real shame after I told him no. It was a real boost for my self-esteem. Now if only a woman would do that. It was my first time on a plane. I was so nervous. Luckily the woman sitting next to me calmed me down. She started talking about her life and that she knew a good amount of Spanish because she was in Spain for a semester. I am Mexican. She stared to speak Spanish to me. She even held my hand while I took a nap. God bless the African queen that he put on that plane to make me feel better. I will never forget you, amiga. I always pray for you whenever I remember how sweet you were to me. When I was 13, I was in a bad place with my mental health. I also had braces which helped nothing. I went to summer camp and one day the man who ran the camp pulled me aside one day and asked me why I never smiled. The honest answer would have been depression. The easy answer was braces. I told him I was embarrassed of having braces. He replied with something along the lines of, you should never let something stop you from being happy. That was 10 years ago and I still try to think of life that way. Obviously it's not that simple, but it still helps. Thank you to Le for the kind words. My father has been mostly absent from mine and my family's life, despite living with us. If he ever does interact with my siblings and I, it's almost always cruel. My brothers and I unfortunately bond over this, and we've become incredibly close as we've gotten older. About a year ago, I was sitting in the garage with one of my brothers, smoking. He had been drinking a bit and started reminiscing about our childhood together, both the good and the bad. It was an emotional conversation, but a fun one. At the end of our conversation, he told me, you're my best friend and I don't say it enough, but I love you, and then gave me a real hug. It's something so small to most people, but I never hear those words come from my dad's or any family member's mouth. My family is the farthest thing from affectionate you could think of. My two brothers combined have been my father growing up and I couldn't be more thankful for them. I truly don't know where myself or my mom would be without them. I flew home from California to North Carolina to visit my family. My wife and I went out to eat at a local breakfast shop. While waiting to be seated, an old couple in front of us sparked some small talk with us. In that 20 minutes we spoke about my military career, life, sports, family, everything. Super cool people. Finally sat down to eat. Enjoyed breakfast. I started looking for our waitress to grab the check when she informed us that the older couple had grabbed the check, paid for us, and thanked us for talking to them that day. Such an awesome feeling. And ever since, if I ever eat out on Sundays and hold a dope conversation with a couple, my wife and I will pay for their meal. Pay it forward. When I first got my period, what nobody told was that cramps could double you over in pain. It was happening to me at that moment at school, so I asked to go see the nurse. Her office was right next to her school secretary's office for some reason, and the mom of one of my schoolmates was outside waiting. I wasn't friends with him, but we recognized each other. The nurse's office was closed and I guess the mix of pain and hormones got to me that I started to cry. This lady asked me what was wrong, so I told her I was having a really bad stomach ache. I didn't mention my period, but I guess she knew because she held me and let me cry while rubbing my back to try help ease the pain until the nurse got back. She then went to do her stuff, but came back to check up on me to see if I felt any better. I haven't forgotten that some 19 years later. It's the small acts of compassion and empathy that really make so much of an impact when someone is feeling vulnerable. We should all realize how much what we do can impact the lives of others. Maybe this isn't too little, but my brother supported us financially while our son was dying. Nicest thing anyone has ever done for me. 3 years ago my partner and I opened a restaurant. This business is very stressful, especially the first months. Not even 3 weeks into the business we get one takeaway. The lady then called us back later that night and told us that she had the best meal of her life. You see, it's very easy to get calls back when there's something wrong with the food, but it's very rare to get ones from happy customers. So that phone call is the best memory I have from the restaurant, which is still up and kicking BTW. When I was a kid we had a snow day and went sledding with my dad and sister. One of the times I went down the hill I went into the road and didn't realize it because everything was covered in snow and some random lady pulled me out of the road. Nearly got hit by a car that day. I'll always remember that lady. Right after my first love died, I was put in a mental health center for a few days. I didn't get to tell anyone where I was, so my friends were quite worried. They only knew me by my last name on Facebook, which was my middle name. So they slipped a handwritten note into my mom's front door that said, "Dear Mrs. Allison, please let us know that Lily is okay. We haven't heard from her and we're very worried." I came home and my mom told me. I cried holding that note. The day I had went to the hospital, I thought the only person who cared about me was dead. I came home to that note, plus 80 messages from friends and strangers on Facebook. I still have the note somewhere. I don't know if she remembers, but I always will. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.